introduce our, I'm going to record our, I'm going to introduce our speaker now, Rae Ferguson. Growing up in post-war Germany, her father was in the military. Rae Ferguson learned very early on what horrific crimes could develop out of racism and white supremacy. Living back in the States in several different regions, she noted the effects on her parents and on herself. As a recently retired history professor, as a working mom, and as a yogi, Rae has spent her adult life teaching, whether raising her children, meditating with friends, or giving URI students an understanding of what active history means. Using her strong meditation practice, her personal memories, and carefully chosen texts, she helped them see people, historical figures, as human beings like themselves. Thank you, Rae.
You're muted, Rae. Rae, you're muted.
There's always something. I was just saying, Johnny really pulled together this much stuff into a nice tight package that says it. I thank you very much. I am so tickled to be here that you guys invited me. And Johnny had seen an article in the alumni magazine at URI that was about me. And when I was talking to the interviewer, I mentioned that I was working on a memoir of my childhood growing up in Germany. I went when I was 11 months old in 1948, and I came back for my third grade year, and then I went back and didn't come back again until I was 16. So I'm really shaped by that experience, and that's one of the things that I do share with my students when I'm teaching, because it adds to whatever their idea of what an African-American woman is, or what an African-American in the US, backgrounds and experiences they might have. But before I get to that, your order of service that you start with breath really really grabs me. I start my classes with breath. It brings them into the room, out of the hall, out of whatever was going on in their dorm room or whatever. So I really connected with that, and I thank you very much. Also, in your chalice lighting, there's so many things that just touch me in ways that go back to my childhood. And I guess everything goes back to my childhood these days because I'm old, I'm retired, and I'm thinking about it. I'm writing about it. But the love lights up the world for me. That's something that I think, although I didn't hear it put that way, has been my guiding light for most of my life. And, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, just popped right in my head, my mother's voice singing that and me singing it with her, and that's such a special, heartfelt moment for me. And I really thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm really tickled. I hear about you guys all the time from Adria and how much she loves this congregation. And I'm really happy to be here. I thought I would start my talk, which is an informal talk. I just moved, so I don't have any of my photos and stuff with me. They're in a box somewhere, who knows where. I ran away from the boxes. I'm in a hotel this morning, but it'll all work out. So I thought I would start one of the ways that I start my classes. I always do something with breath and with silence, to, like I said, bring them in the room, to make them present, sitting in that seat. So wherever you are, Just very lightly, let your eyes close. Feel your feet on the floor and rest your hands, in your lap or wherever is comfortable for you, but feel the connection between the skin on your hands and your feet and whatever surface they're on. And then just bring your attention to your breath. You don't have to make it do anything. Thank God we don't have to remember to breathe. Just feel where it goes in your body. Maybe as it enters your nostrils, down past the back of your throat. And soften your belly and just let it go in there after it passes the lungs. And then feel it on its way out. Notice how deep or shallow it is. Either one is fine, just notice. Notice its length. Notice the temperature of your breath. And you should know that we all breathe, but your breath is your life signature. It's unique to you the way you breathe. And it shifts at different moments, at different times in your life. And take a deep inhale through your nostrils and then sigh it out through your mouth. And feel your body settle into the earth. Feel the earth hold your body. Do 3 or 4 of those at your own pace. And connect with the earth's support on each exhale. Then rub your palms together. Drop your chin on your chest and cover your eyes with your palms. And just breathe a moment. Notice your breath in. How is it doing? And then when you're ready, lift your head and open your eyes. And just notice where you are in your body right now. How do you feel? Usually by the end of that, after I tell some young man at the back of the room, just humor me, I have the grade book, close your eyes. And we move on. But usually by the end of that, you can feel the air in the room has shifted, that all that skitsy, excited stuff that my freshmen have has settled, and they're able to hear me, at least for a little while, at the beginning of class. So I usually start my classes with something like that. I decided long ago when I was younger, there's no point in studying yoga and doing all this meditation and stuff if it doesn't come out of my pores and permeate wherever I am. And teaching at URI, teaching at universities, has really given me the opportunity to share that with young folks who may, as soon as class is over, run back to whatever frenetic things they were doing before, but who usually at some point remember, especially if I start class every time with that. I remember I teach in the talent development program in the summers, or I did those many summers. And those kids were so excited. Do you all know what talent development is? It's a program where they start working with students in high school from disadvantaged or underrepresented areas in the state. Most of the students will be Latino or African American. I had a lot of Hmong students for a period of time, and white students who come from poorer farming families in the state. And they're also usually the first generation of students in their family to go to college. So they don't have that culture of what college means in their families. So they're identified by high school principals and teachers. They're recommended for the program. They start working with the students and their families in their junior year in high school to get them ready. And they come to URI in July for a 5-week semester, the second summer semester. They take regular college courses, and if they can pass both college courses, these are students who have good grades but don't test well on SATs. And if they pass both of those courses with a C or higher, the university admits them in the fall and gives them support their freshman year. That group of students, those students in TD, have the highest graduation rate from freshman through senior year at the university. And they come in there that first summer so excited. If I told them to stand on their head, they would do it because they want to succeed. So I don't ask them to do that, but I start them with things that I think will help them once they get there in the fall. And I usually don't see them again until their junior or senior year when they come back to take my course on Black women or in African American history or Caribbean history. But when they come, the breath work is one of the things that they mention to me as something that they kept up. Not all of them, but many of them, enough of them for me to know that it makes some difference. So let's see. There's a universal blessing that I want to read. It's a universal prayer. And it's one that was taught to be by my teacher. And I'm using the word teacher in a very specific sense. It says, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. May all be joyful. May all be healthy. May all see only auspicious sights. May no one have a share in sorrow. For me, I think joy rides the breath, and joy is the very nature of our divine self. We come from joy, we're sustained in joy, and we return to joy. You know, and because joy is the essence of everything, we have the ability to bring it out from within our own selves if we choose to do that. So when we cultivate joy inside, we're better able to manifest it in the world around us. And without using those words and without saying that, when I look at Black communities, Black women and children in previous times, say in the 19th century, I'm able to bring that out in their lives. And it is there. The research I do, the words of the women and men that I study when I do my research, they are connected with that, and they're consciously thinking of that. Did I do something? No. And that's one of the things that's really important to me to share with my students or to make them aware of. One of the things when you teach the history or when you teach any class that's about non-white, non-middle class, non-Western persons, one of the central problems is how to center the work that we do, the study that we do of them in the lives of the people about whom we are teaching and writing, as they see themselves, more so than as how some theory I have might place them in a way that's really not what they saw about themselves. Now, that was a problem, I would say, up to the 1990s, when you did research. I'll go with Black women, particularly on Black women, because there wasn't that much that was even cataloged in archives as something that had to do with Black women. So researchers back then had to go through every piece of paper in Chicago, and then they would find 4 or 5 things that were like gold about them. So preconceptions about what's normal and what makes sense, we all have them to a certain extent, but working around those with my students is my goal. When I was talking to Johnny, I told her basically there are a couple of things that I think is important for me to do. And one is to enable students to center their view in the view of another experience. And that's one of the things that makes a good historian and is a valuable skill for students to learn, to be able to step outside themselves to some extent and see what someone else is saying in the context of that time. And then to be able to judge it by its own standards and to see ourselves as part of history, that timeline, that thread itself, and how our actions and thoughts and the things we care about might compare with those of people in the past. And when I do that, I try to teach like my survey course, looking at young people at different times, people the age of the students who are in my classes, as a hook to get them into really looking. In Black culture, there's this offbeat patterning that you find in the music and jazz and blues, in quilting. And the history itself is these many different voices in a particular community, in a cultural community, in political and economic things that are going on. But there are these many different voices, and they make sense in community. In Louisiana, they call that gumbo yaya. And it's part of that thing where, say you've been away from home and you come back, and this happened with me. I went with a friend of mine who was from Lafayette, and we flew into New Orleans, and all these women in her family met her at the airport. And from the airport into the living room of the house, the 2-hour drive down to Lafayette, everybody was talking all at one time, and everybody could hear each other, and everybody knew what everybody was saying. For me, the child of my mother, who's a Northeasterner, that was a little challenging, but wonderful at the same time. So that's an example of this: many different voices, many different actions, many different ideas. My students, when they come, think African Americans are kind of monolithic. We all think about the same thing the same way. We're all in that civil rights vein. And it's just because that's all they've ever been taught. So I try to take them out of that. Unfortunately, they're in college and they're hopefully more interested in complexity than my junior high students were many years ago. So that's like one aim. And it's a big one. It's a big one. And often I don't know how successful I am until maybe 5-10 years later, when I get a call or an email from a student who says, "Hi, do you remember me?" And I'm like, not quite, but I don't tell them that. And then they say, "Well, remember when you said such and such?" And I'm like, "Lord, what did I say now?" And then they say, Well, let me tell you what happened last Thursday. That makes so much sense to me. So I know if I hear from one of them or two of them that happened, there's a bunch of them not calling me. And that something, will make that I do in class touches them in a way that helps them at another point in life. And I was telling Johnny, there's also this thing about I share a lot of my own life experiences or experiences of people in my family, because I want them, and they comment on it when they write evaluations, that she's very generous with her own experiences and that it makes a difference in them understanding whatever it is. It's because I was a nosy child from 1950 until this morning when I got up. So I was always curious about. I'm part of the 60s generation. I was 17 when all that happened, but I happened to be around the Safe House for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee members when they came up out of the South to decompress from being in the war zone in Mississippi and Alabama, and the stories I heard because I could sit in the corner and listen quietly. And because they were about teaching the next generation about this stuff and the things that they needed, we needed to know in order to grow in a certain way. So I share all those kinds of things when we're reading about the beloved community. We're reading Diane Nash's description of what happened in Nashville with the sit-ins, and then I can talk about, oh, and so said such and such. Or I can talk about the influence that, and they were the big guys to me, the big kids to me, that generation had on me and my friends at that time. And all of that comes through as people have done more research, more in-depth research about these things. But I think me, flesh and blood, being in the classroom with them, talking about these things openly and honestly, sits it a little differently in them. Let me see, blah, blah, blah. So getting to know the young me as part of that, I think makes it more real to them. I often find we tend to idolize people in the past, but we forget, that they're human beings just like us. And part of that is a way of diminishing our own possibilities. So empowerment, is part of that that I do with them. I know I'm kind of jumping around a little. I'm looking forward to questions and answers. I'm just giving you a little taste of different things. So what do I do in a class? I think I mentioned quilting before. I'll just give you a couple examples. And that African-American quilts are not all neatly the same size squares or triangles or whatever to make different patterns, but they're polyrhythmic pieces of fabric that are put together in ways that you might not have thought of, but that really means something to the person who's making the quilt. So in order to get students a couple of semesters, in order to get them to understand this idea of many different voices creating what they see as a historical thread, and that the thread would be different without any of those voices in it. I talk about it, I theorize about it, I give them the pieces to read by Elsa Barkley Brown, which are very clear, and they don't get it. So one year, I went to a fabric shop. I bought a bunch of fabric. I brought it to class. And every Wednesday that we met in class, they sat around the table and they quilted. And they had to quilt a piece that expressed some idea out of the things they were reading. And the boys had to do this too, although they whined, I've never sewed anything. Can I have my mother do it? I was like, no. So everybody every Wednesday. And we would talk about the text for that day, but we talked about it while they were quilting. And they had time to work with each other. And this worked because I had a class that was an hour and 15 minutes each time that we met at that time. And it took 6 weeks until, looking at each other's pieces, one of the young men said, I get it. I finally get it. I know what all these different voices thing that you were talking about means. You know, so doing things like that. I believe using your hands, doing tactile stuff while you're thinking at the same time, seats ideas in your body. Singing seats ideas in your body. Mixing, you know, combining, bringing together all those different qualities that we have as a human being. You know, they'll never forget what they learned in that class. And I hope they'll know how to find more information, because we also did a lot of that too. So that's one example. At other times, and more often than not, I set the class up so that they run the class. It's my job to choose texts, and I really spend a lot of time picking texts that are accessible, that are unusual, and that will make them think, possibly in different ways. It's my job to set the schedule of when we will read this and talk about this, or watch this video, or go this place and think about these different ideas. And it's my job to advise students, but not to overrule their use of class time. So for this class, students have to read ahead in order to participate. Students are responsible to prepare and to conduct the class. Each student is required to help another student in preparation for her or his class. Students can prevent me from attempting to move the class along in what might be more appropriate ways. And I got to go along with that. And each student has to do a weekly self-evaluation and evaluation of other members of the class. So they have to interact with each other, not just over a Coke, but they have to share ideas. They have to listen to each other's ideas about how to run the class for a particular day, because they're working with them. And this enables them to see each other and to hear each other in ways they might not normally do. And also each student, if they participate in this, and I do have students who drop when because it's work, when they realize they'll have to do this much work, but each one of them is empowered by their own authority and the right to expect things from others in class. Another example, in written assignments, I'll give written assignments that are very broadly formulated. And by that, I mean, I'll ask them to research something that is a broad idea, not something specific. So number one, it's usually something comparative. So they have to think about more than one thing in terms of it. And they're used to mostly doing individual work and being competitive with each other. But the questions I formulate, they need to find somebody else in the class to work with them on it, so that they can break the work up, so that each person can become, I see, as an expert in a particular area of this broader question. And then they have to come together and figure out how they would write a paper, make a video about it, do a podcast about it. Because each student has different strengths, they come up with very creative things, but solid in the text and that they're looking at, and in the work and in the way they're thinking about things. Again, it's something that I guess, empowerment is really important to me. And I have them consider what was their process of working together. And again, to see that all these different voices, all these different pieces of it are important to the process that brings it all together. So in terms of history, individuals are understood in the context of the whole community. As more has been uncovered in archives in like the last 10, 15 years, you have more people coming out of graduate school doing research on children in different historical eras, on elderly folks in different historical eras, taking the narrative away from strict focus on economic and political issues and what people only did around those things, to give a broader view of African Americans at different times as full human beings. And by Western norms, or by norms, we have other faculty come do teaching evaluations in your classes before tenure. And if you look in my classroom and you come in my classroom, it may look like total disorganized, chaotic, sporadic mess, because everybody's talking at the same time and they're not whispering, to each other in their groups. They get excited about the ideas that they are sharing with someone else who may not agree with them, but it's all happening at once. And if you're used to people being very neatly arranged and raising their hand to speak and whatnot, it looks like chaos to you. So I remember when my first evaluation, one of my professor's colleagues, do you know Bob Weisbord at all? He was wonderful. Bob did my evaluation and he said, it took me a while. He said, but by the end of class, when everybody reported back what came from their group, he said, they got it. But they not only got it, but they know it's okay to have voice, to use voice, to listen to somebody else, and to share ideas. And to me, that was what was always exciting about education. I come from educators. My aunts were educators. Every old person, or every person older than me as a child, thought of themselves as an educator and always asked me, well, little girl, what do you think about so-and-so? Or what do you want to do, or whatever, which is part of that, empowering you to have expectations or dreams or whatever. So talking and talking. I loved teaching. I love retirement. I'm looking for a different kind of joy, but I don't see myself ever really totally not being a teacher, even though I'm not in the classroom right now. And I hope this is a little bit of what you all were looking for. I always have a hard time when I'm talking about myself, narrowing it to one thread, because there's, like for my historical actors, there are a million threads that feed your life, and each is important and each is a part of who you are. Thank you very much.
Yes.